figurative sense. So the question then is, how do we determine what our demand for labor is? Well, it turns out that the demand for labor is actually a little bit more driven off the numbers. Because, of course, remember, what are we trying to do when we are, in these companies that are out there in the world, right, in our capitalistic society? What are we trying to do? What are all the companies in the U.S. doing? Money, right? Remember, trying to make profit. And then the second thing they think about is profit. And the third thing they think about is profit. And the fourth thing they think about is more profit, okay? I mean, that's all we care about, all right? So it can actually come down to numbers. So the way it works is, imagine, if you will, that we're hiring people, right? And labor, I mean, you can think of this as one person. Realize that businesses don't tend to think of people as people. They tend to think of them as a three-letter acronym. FTE stands for full-time employee. Why do you think businesses call people FTEs? That's exactly right. They don't get personal. You don't worry about there being an emotional connection to anyone, because that would get in the way of making money, 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 and more money. Because, again, that's all we want to do, right? So if you ever work for a company that calls you an FTE, just be ready, okay? I, at this particular school, am called an FTE, okay? Whenever the vice presidents of this school talk about teachers, they don't call them teachers. They don't call them even, they can't even call us employees. That's too personal. We are FTEs. In order to cover the general education requirements that this school requires or needs to teach, we must have 22 FTEs. And that's how I'm referred to. I'm all warm and fuzzy. Okay, again, I being an economist, I look at that and say, okay, I understand. But at the same time, I'm also understanding. All right? So bear it in mind. All right, so let's go with an example, right? So let's assume that if we hire one person or group of people, or FTEs, however you want to think of our total output as 20 units. If I hire a second one, let's say I go to 38 units. If I hire a third one, let's go to 44 units. If I hire a fourth one, or I meant 54, let's make them at least marginally productive. Let's go with 66, and then let's go with 76, and then let's go with 80. Okay? Just pulling numbers out of my hat for the most part. So again, as you hire more workers, you are still getting more output. So generally speaking, that's a good thing. But the key here is, what's the marginal product that each one of these people have added to output? Again, this is marginal product, and it is how much output did that person add. Well, the first person, how much did they add to output? 20 units. How much did the second person add to output? 18. The third person, fourth person, 12. The fifth person, and number 6. And the cool part about it is that now, marginal product is good, but we really care about is money. Right? Again, output is a good thing, but what we really want to do is to talk about money. How do we convert our product into money? What do we have to do with it? What do businesses do to get money? Well, yeah, I know, but what do they have to do with this product, right? Let's suppose these are they have to sell it. Very good. Okay. So when they sell it, what do they have to set? Price. Okay. So let's assume that the price, let's keep it an easy number so that our multiplication isn't hard, is $10. So marginal revenue product, which is defined as the amount of revenue a person generates, or how much revenue does a person's work add to the coffers of the business, this is how you figure it out, right? You're going to take however much they added to output and multiply by the price. Because you're going to sell 20 units at 10 bucks a unit. This first worker generated $200 of revenue. The second worker generated $180 of revenue, etc. down the line. All right, and technically, if you were to graph this, you would get this. So up here, this would be 200, and my quantity of labor would be 1. This would be 180, and this would be a quantity of 2. And the nice part about it is that this set of numbers would give you a nice downward sloping demand curve, okay? Which you expected anyways, so, no biggie. So the question is, how many people do I hire? Four, 5, 3, 2. How do you determine where the cutoff is? Again, your management. How would you figure it out? What else? What piece of information are you missing? This is how much money they earn. This is revenue. How much you pay them, or cost, right? So how do you determine the cost of labor? Well, the nice thing about the cost of labor is that it works just like figuring out the price in any other market. It's driven by equilibrium. Let's assume that for simplicity's sake, based on the supply and demand for labor, you pay these people $110 a day. That's what you've worked out, or at least that's what the labor market will allow, right? If you didn't pay them $110, they wouldn't do the job, okay? So my question to you is, how many of these people do you hire now? 4. Why? Yeah, you hire up until the point where the amount of money that person generates is more than the amount of money you're going to pay them, because you're a business and all you care about is money, 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 and profit. So even if this is your tightest, best friend in the entire world, doesn't matter. You can them. Sorry. You downsize them, right? Because that sounds much nicer. And you don't downsize them, you downsize an FTE. They're not your friend, they're just an FTE. It's okay. No one worries about losing 3 letters, right? There's 26 other ones, we'll be fine. Welcome to the world of business, all right? So, what would happen if the price falls to $7? They are probably going to make further cutbacks. Why? You're going to start losing profit. MRP changes. What do these numbers become if my price falls to $7? Well, now instead of being 200, this is only going to be 140. So 18 times 7. God damn it, I should have picked an easier number. 126. 16 times 7, 112. 12 times 7, 84, 70, 28. Now, How many people would we lay off because the price of our product fell from $10 to $7? We would only hire 3 now, so we had 4, we had to lay off 1 FTE. And again, whatever an FTE stands for, whether it stands for one person or one group of people, right? Because this could be an entire line at a car factory, which could represent hundreds of people instead of just 1, all right? And this is why when people say, gosh, I really wish prices would go down, I look at them and say, really? This is what's going to happen if prices fall, folks. Oh, well, and that's what you hope, right? In fact, that's exactly what business has been doing for the past 20 years. As prices have stayed stale, right? Prices haven't really gone up very much in the last 10 years. Our inflation has never been more than about 3 or 4%. And over the last 4 years, it's been more like 1. Right? So what are they doing? They're basically saying, okay, instead of a $110 wage rate, what are we doing? Yeah, exactly. We shift our demand down. We say, oh, we don't really need as many workers as we thought we did. So we shift our demand to the left. And when we shift our demand for labor to the left, what happens to the equilibrium wage rate? It's down, and we pay people less. Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, come on, you go work for GM nowadays. It used to be you'd make $40 an hour minimum working for GM. Oh, yeah. More than cut it in half. Welcome to the new world, in theory. Okay? So be careful what you ask for in this world, because this is very, very true. Right? When a company has to lower the price of its product, I guarantee you they're laying people off. Period. Right? That's all there is. That's all there is to it. Right? Unless, of course, the people are willing to accept wage cuts, and then it's okay, right? Because FTEs, right? They're not people. They're just 3 letters. They're getting a certain amount of money that leave your accounts, which really sucks and pisses you off because it's taken away from your profit, right? Just like government, right? Government taxes you. That's taking away from profit. Damn government, it's terrible. Even when it's closed, guess what, folks? We're still paying taxes. Okay, so this is how the demand for labor is generated, and this is really as far as I want to go when it comes to dealing with labor, okay? At least from a numbers perspective, right? So be able to tell me, 1, how to calculate MRP. So calculate the marginal product, multiply by the price. All right, so that's a little bit of a demand analysis. Let's look at it from the supply side. Who controls the supply of labor, right? So business is really the people who are driving the demand for labor. And in theory, because we're having more automation and we're having more outsourcing, our demand for U.S. labor has constantly been decreasing, and that's why wages are falling, right? Again, economically, makes total sense, right? No problems with it. And everybody else is relatively okay with it, except for, of course, all those FTE things, whatever they are. They're, you know, if we could just get rid of them, we would be much better off, in theory. All right, so this is sort of the demand side of things. Who controls the supply of labor? So we tend to think of the supply of labor as being sort of this fixed supply. In other words, if a company comes out and says, I'm going to pay you $110 a day to come do this job, there will be a certain number of people that show up. If we lower the price, if we lower the wage rate to $90, again, some people will show up, but it will be less, because that makes sense, right? I mean, you know, if you're not going to get paid as much, not many people would show up to get that job. Now, who tries to muck with how much wages get paid to workers? Government tries a little bit, but what did the government doesn't, well, it really can't control it too terribly much, because the government doesn't necessarily step in and play God with workers. Who workers? Who gathers the workers together and forms a group of them? Unions, right? This used to be a bigger controller of the supply of labor in our market, but yeah, 30 or 40 years ago, 40% of all jobs were unionized. Today, in the US, 15%, 12%, and it's still going down. We are one of the least unionized countries in the world right now, actually. I mean, the only country that's less unionized is China. And that's because they're communist. If they tried to form a union, well, then the government steps in and fixes it. All right, so my question to you is, how do unions control labor? How do they control the supply? So right, so again, remember, these are wages. The price of people are wages. The quantity of labor, this is employment, right? How many people are actually working? So, what do unions have to do? I mean, what are they trying to do, first of all, right? They're trying to get their workers more wages, right? They're trying to raise their salaries, right? I mean, that's the goal of the union. You wouldn't join a union if the union couldn't get you more money. Or more money in whatever format you want it, either more benefits or less work time or whatever, okay? So what do unions have to do to the supply curve in order to make this intersection point move up, right? They have to reduce the supply of labor, right? In order for wages to go up, supply of labor needs to go to the left, which means it needs to be cut, right? Because here was our wage rate before, right? Here was our $110 a day. With the union, all of a sudden now we're getting paid $130 a day. Perfect, right? That's exactly what we as workers wanted, right? Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, what comes with this reduction in supply? Here are the hired at that wage rate, at 110 bucks, right? Imagine, if you will, this is what it was. When the union steps in and says, no, we won't work for $110 a day, we want to get paid $130 a day. And if the company says, okay, we accept the fact that you're demanding this and we'll pay it, that's absolutely right. The quantity of workers must decrease. In other words, one of the things that unions do to try and get more money is to create more unemployment. Which sounds really bad, but it's actually the technique that they use, right? Because that's what they have to do. This is what the economics tells us. To get paid more, you have to have less people working. Oops. And of course, the more the unions flexed their muscles back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, the more wages went up and the more unemployment went up with it. Eventually, what had happened? Backlash, right? Welcome to the 90s and the 2000s, where we all assume that unions are these terrible things that are just forcing wages to be higher. They're a bunch of greedy bastards, and that they're the reason why our country sucks now, because they're making unemployment happen. Of course, in the process of making unemployment, what they were also doing was potentially giving you a more reasonable living wage. Maybe. Depends on how well you argue and which political party you're a member of, generally. Now the Twinkies are back. All right. So how does a union restrict labor? What are its tactics? One of my favorite ones, I love this one. Bedding. It's there's kind of two different ways to go about reading what feather bedding is. One way to read into it less work time for the same amount of pay. So one of the things that unions did was they said, okay, we have to be at work 8 hours a day. We're okay with that. But if we're going to go to work 8 hours a day and we're going to, work on the assembly line and we're going to screw the nut onto the bolt for the car tire, and that's what we do for 8 straight hours, if you do this for 8 straight hours, what's going to happen to you? You're going to develop what's called carpal tunnel syndrome, right? You're going to have this big, huge, beefy right arm, and your left arm is going to look like a little stick. And more than likely, you will start to have cartilage problems in your hand and in your elbow and in your shoulder. And so what did the unions demand back in the 60s and 70s? They said, wait a second, if we do this for 8 straight hours with no breaks, we're screwed. So they said, hey, why don't we just go 2 hours, and then every 2 hours we take a 15-minute break? Right? The unions were the ones who came up with smoke breaks. Technically, in a unionized shop, you are never supposed to work more than 2 straight hours without getting a 15-minute break where you can go and, relax a little bit and rejuvenate yourself. Because what's going to happen if you work for 2 hours and then don't get a break? I mean, what happens if you guys study for 2 straight hours and you don't take any breaks at all and you study for another 2 hours? How did those next 2 hours go? They were crap, right? Because you're tired, your eyes are going buggy, you're like, oh, you're looking around going, woo, or maybe your kids are crying. So the unions argued that we need a 15-minute break so that we're more productive, right? But you're not going to not get paid for those 15 minutes, are you? Oh, no, you're still going to get paid because that extra 15-minute break is going to allow you to be more productive. So instead of working an 8-hour day, we're going to get 15-minute break at 2 hours. We're going to have a 30-minute lunch that we're paid for and a 15-minute break. The next two-hour span, we'll work 7 hours and get paid for 8. So if you're working 7 hours and getting paid for 8, what happened to your wage rate? It went up, right? Because now taking your daily pay of $110, normally you divide it by 8 because that's the number of hours you work. Now you only divide by 7. Higher wage rate. And in addition, you're only doing 7 hours of work per day. They're only getting 7 hours of productivity out of you a day. Therefore, in order to gain that extra hour, what do they have to do? They got to hire 1/8 of a person, right? So it actually leads to them hiring more people to get the same amount of work done, in theory. That's the idea behind it anyways, okay? So it's a nice idea, but what most people tend to think when they think unions, though, is the stuff that gets advertised and gets dramatized and thrown way out of proportion, right? I mean, what do unions do? They strike, right? That's their number one power, is to say, oh yeah, if you're not going to pay us $130 a day, nobody's going to show up for work. And then you get the whole, no, you're a scab, and no, you're not a scab, but I just need to have the money, blah, 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 and all that other kind of stuff. That's another one of their powers, all right, is to threaten to strike. Now, one of the other things that they do, and this one, again, it sounds like it's a good idea, but bear with me. Job requirements. So things like apprenticeships, all of that stuff, determining how many years you have to be an apprentice, that was all created by the union. And again, it was a way to make it harder for you to become a master plumber. You had to be an apprentice, then you had to be a journeyman, and then you became a master. And it took you 7 years as an apprentice, 4 years as a journeyman before you could become a full master plumber, right? And that meant that there were less master plumbers. If there's less master plumbers, what do you have to pay a plumber when he comes to your house? More. Is that a good thing? I mean, it's guaranteeing that the people who do the job are good, right? Because they've spent 11 years doing it already. Some of them have been apprentices who had to be, watched over by a master, etc. Luckily, I don't have to make the call as to whether it's good or bad. It just is, all right? But that's the key to it, right? And again, the same sort of thing happens to me here at this job. My job is to teach. if there is a problem with this board, and I need to have this board cleaned, it is not my job. If I clean the board, like if I get out the little spray bottle here and spray the bottle down and wipe it all down, guess what happens to me? I actually get in trouble because it's not my job. My job is defined as a teacher. There are other people who are hired in the maintenance crew who do the cleaning of the boards. They know how they're supposed to be done. They know the way they're supposed to be done, and therefore there won't be a problem when they do the cleaning of the board. Whereas if I do it, do I know how to clean the board specifically? Well, maybe not, right? Maybe there's an exact amount of fluid you're supposed to spray on the board before you start wiping it down. And if I don't know, I could screw up the board worse. Again, that guarantees that the maintenance guy has to have his job to come here and clean the board, even though in theory, I could probably do it. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. Right? That's just how it works, okay? Now, these are the nasty things about unions, right? This is, if you hear people bitching about unions, these are the sorts of things nowadays. Now, the other thing that a union can try and do is instead of mucking with the supply, how else can they get wages to go up, right? So if they can't make supply, if they can't restrict supply, because that creates unemployment, right? That's bad. We don't like that. What else can unions do to make wages go up? Increase demand, exactly. So if there were a way for a union to say, increase the demand for the product, right? Because the demand for the product is directly tied for the demand for the labor. Because if people demand the product, what happens to the price? Goes up, right? So if people buy American, what happens to the price of American goods? Goes up. What happens to the marginal revenue product of all of our workers? Since the price is going up, by default, so is their revenue generating power. Therefore, their wages will go up with it, right? So the other thing that unions try to do is increase demand. Unfortunately, this is really hard to do. Because a union can't tell its union members to buy more American because there's only so many people in a union, right? I mean, there's like 400,000 or 500,000 people in unions nowadays. If all of those people would religiously only buy American products, it still probably wouldn't make a difference, right? But the idea is there, right? Buy American campaigns. So what you saw happening, right, in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, as unions started to look more and more unattractive because of the unemployment that they were causing, they shifted their tactics. They took the money that they were getting from union dues, and instead of spending it on trying to restrict supply, they instead spent it on Buy American campaigns, right? So for a good 4 or 5 years, those advertisements you saw that said, buy American-made products, it's good for the country, that was being paid for by my union dues. Because what they were trying to do was to get me a higher wage. If you guys would buy American, hey, prices of American goods would go up, which is good for me. Again, this is where it gets a little bit fuzzy, and this is where it's best to think about people as FTEs instead of people. And that's why we do it. So that when you get into that position of management and have to remove said FTE, it's not as much of a pain in the ass. All right, so this is what I wanted you to get out of Chapter 10, okay? I don't want to go any deeper than this. This is good enough. Just know these few things that unions do to try and increase your wages. Please know how to calculate marginal revenue product. And then remember that you hire up until, that point where you hire somebody and it costs you more than you make, right? Standard business practice, right? You're only going to hire people who make you money because that's your job. Make money. All right. Any questions about this? All right. In that case, folks, next week is midterm week. It is an entire week of tests, folks. There's 2 parts to the test. There's 50 multiple choice answers, and then there are 10 short answer graphing questions. If you can get them all done in one day, you are done for the week and you do not have to come back on Wednesday. Once you start a portion of the test, though, you must finish it. So, yeah, no. Once you've got the test, you can look at the questions, and I don't want you to look at the questions and then go find the answers and then come back on Wednesday and fill it out. So realize that that's what's going to happen on Monday next week. We will start, and again, it's your choice, whichever one you want, whichever half of the test you want to start with. And once you're done with it, you turn it in, and if you have time and you would like to, you can take the other half, and if you finish it, or when you finish it, you're done for the week, okay? And I will give you credit for showing up on the next day, even if you don't have to show up, okay? So don't show up on a day you don't need to. I'll still give you credit for it, okay? I did post a study guide and some practice test questions on Blackboard if you want to take a peek. Do not focus on the practice test questions. Those are really just to give you an idea. You're better off studying your quizzes than you are the practice test, okay? The quizzes are more representative of the types of questions I will ask. All right. Anything else? Take off then. Did you turn me off, Joe?